I want to talk about the book now.
Okay.
Unfettered. I've read the whole book, but the first page, it just rocks you when you read the first words. And I'm going to read this for my audience. This is to anyone with depression, but especially to someone who is considering taking your own life. Depression lies to you. It will try to convince you that taking your life is the solution.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
You went through that.
Oh, absolutely. I never thought that. People, myself, I thought, well, if you're depressed, maybe, well, you're just in the dumps or you're just kind of sad. But it actually is a very specific affliction. And now, if you are unable to arrest that, you begin to have that conversation with yourself, and then you convince yourself that the solution is to just take your life. I had two friends take their lives, and they both had young children at that time. And for me, my own kids, that was my emergency brakes. I can't ever be the example. And my friends that they did succumb to it, that didn't make them weak or a failure. I was just lucky. So that's why that's message to anyone. And I know many, many, many people suffer depression. And now look at our veteran community. 17 or 18 veterans take their lives every day. It's epidemic. In our nation, over 50,000 people take their lives. So that's an important conversation that's appropriate to have. And I know it's definitely not a political winner to talk about suicide, but ironically, it got the worst, and that conversation started to accelerate after I won. That's what makes it so counterintuitive. That's not what broke me out of it. What broke me out of it was my own kids. And everyone needs that kind of an emergency brake. And if you refuse to take that path, that guarantees you'll eventually get back in your path for recovery, whatever that is. I'm not an expert, but I keep it simple to say, stay in that game. And that's the message to anybody. And I've encountered people, they've reached out to me or even stopped me in public. Thank you, to talk about it. Hey, I was there. And after, either the book or your example, talking about it being in Walter Reed, I got help, or that reminds me how important it is. And I grieve for any of the family members that have been hit by that as well, too. And
you're very raw in this book about what you went through.
Yeah.
Was there any part of you that hesitated to be that raw and vulnerable about it?
No, it's like that's a responsibility. If you're gonna pick up something like this, I think you deserve, the people deserve to just have that, to realize. Not sure if people really realizes how ugly and horrific it is to be in that conversation with yourself. I mean, you want to erase yourself, and I did feel that, and how dangerous that is. And all of the research of people that survived from a serious attempt to take their lives, 100% they all agree, thank God I'm okay. Everyone regretted what they've done after they crossed the rail on the bridge, or they're able to recover. Thank God. And that's the truth. And that's why, don't find out, maybe you survive it, maybe you don't, but you just stay in this game, because you will hurt the people that you love, and that's not the solution.
I just want to read from page 169. I went through, this is you speaking, obviously, I went through the unimaginable pain that comes from a disease of the mind. Irrationality masquerading as rationality, the brittle bones and visible scars of a wasted life. Suicidal, paranoid, not eating, not sleeping, not speaking, not functioning, resigned, ashamed, despairing, despairing everywhere I was, every emotion turning me inside out. Up was down, and down was up. I dreaded the light coming up in the morning. I stayed in bed as long as I could, then moved to the couch, where I spent hours staring out the window, looking for something, anything I could no longer see. My only balm was the darkness.
That sums it up. Now, right now, quite literally 3 years ago, where we sit, I was sitting in Walter Reed. Exactly. And I dread daylight. At least at night, I could be in bed and I could just hide, and I wouldn't have to be confronted either by Giselle, my wife, or my kids. They don't want them to see me like this. I didn't have to even pretend to be like, oh yeah, I'm great, I'm okay, whatever. Everyone has heard the expression, you can't get out of bed. And well, I didn't agree that. I'm like, well, not really, but it is true. Anyone that suffers from true depression, you can't get out of bed. And I stopped to eat, I stopped to drink, and I dropped down to my lowest weight ever. And I dread any interaction, and it was minimal. And the shame comes from the kids could know that that there's a problem, and that forced me to lie to him and say, "Well, Dad, Dad's okay. Dad's okay." And how scary that must be to children to see their father. And aren't we enough? Why aren't we enough? Daddy, you won. You won. They just couldn't understand that, and how horrible it is. And yeah, that's why I've talked about it, because I know so many people have that. And every time you come across in the media stories of people that took their life, just recently, like that actor, Robert Carradine took his life. For other people, that tells me that they all had that conversation, and their mind convinced them that the solution is to take yourself out. And
that's the lie.
Yeah, that's the lie. That's the lie. Yeah.
What depression tells you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at the people that took their lives. There was the young man that played for the Dallas Cowboys last. Yeah, they have every reason to stick around. See how loved these people were, and they decide that hey, it's better if I'm gone. That's the lie, and how toxic it is. You could convince yourself to do the most awful thing you can do to yourself.
In the book, you describe being in remission from depression.
Well, remission.
Because that sounds like a cancer.
It is. It's a cancer that if you don't address it, it will consume you. And it will turn you into a person that you just really don't recognize anymore. And then there's a responsibility to the people in your life that you love to stay in that game. So ever since that moment, I have nothing but just grateful, profound gratitude to be free of that. And I can't ever see myself ever returning to that dark place and ever allow myself to have that conversation or entertain it.
Do you find joy that you didn't used to find in simple things?
Oh, I used to really make that, whether it's the very most basic ones like your morning coffee, or more very important things like time with the families, or music, or taking long walks. That was always been my therapy and my exercise. I stopped doing all of those things. Anyone in your life you might think they're depressed. Witness what they used to love if they stop engaging in then. That's a huge red flag, and that absolutely means that this person is starting to count down to the wrong path.
What's better, being a senator or a mayor of Braddock?
Oh, they're very different. They're very different. But some of my most gratifying ones came from being mayor. You know, that gave me the opportunity to confront gun violence, and I did. And in a community that was racked by that kinds of violence, you know, we were able to go 5.5 years without that, and they live in my arm here. You know, that started, I can't believe now it's been 20 years. So
those are tattoos of dates,
yeah, the dates
of homicides.
when the dates when people were killed, and that started 20 years ago. So now here in the Senate, you know, it's a much different kinds of job, and it's a bigger stage, and that's why I want to use that stage to be of value and having that conversation about self-harm, because last year our country reached the 50,000, I believe, Americans took their lives. That's an epidemic. And if that conversation has saved at least a life, and it has, so then it's been worthwhile. You know, I had a father reach out to me, and they had a young son, and I drove to, and I met with he was 15 years old at the time, and the young man already attempted to take his life twice. And how heartbreaking. I have a son the same age. I can't imagine if my own boy was going to do those things. And the same message to him was the same message to anyone listening, is stay in that game. And is promise yourself to do that. That, you know, guarantees that it'll put you on the path of recovery. Yours will be different than mine, or different than anyone else. It's unique, but it's almost guarantee.
You write in the book about the care you received. It was substantial. Do you ever think about that and wonder if those who are not well positioned, who don't have access to that care, how they have to struggle through?
Well, what also Walter Reed, what it actually did provide was an opportunity to isolate myself away of the people that I was constantly disappointing them. And it just got me to get alone on that. Ironically, in that moment that changed everything, it was a young psychiatrist in training, and my kids wanted to visit, and then I pushed back against her, and I said, no, I don't, they don't want to see me like this. They don't want to see me that. And then I believe it seems like she must have kind of stepped out of her role and said, you know, every kid needs their daddy. And it just hit me. And suddenly it was just, really? And then I agreed. And then it was then that visit and they arrived, and oh my gosh, I assumed that the kids didn't want me back. I think that the kids just kind of wanted me away, but that was just the opposite, that they wanted their dad back. And that's the thing that kind of spontaneously, you know, fixed that and broke me out of the skid, you know, out of that despair.